Hey, and we've got another video here. Just wanted to talk about some more stuff that was spurred from this discussion, this recent turn that our administration has decided to, or the establishment has decided to entertain instead of, helping our communities in regard to basic nutrition or accessible health care or, anything regarding education or the climate, or stopping war, or alleviating poverty in a broader sense. No, what they're talking about, and it's not just Ben Shapiro, it's all amongst the establishment. They're talking about how people should not be, or should be, um, retiring later, right? They're trying to push back the retirement age. Um, and again, when you consider class dynamics and who Ben Shapiro is financed by and beholden to, and who those in the establishment are financed by and beholden to, that advocate for similar things, it all becomes pretty clear. Obviously, it's just a scheme to squeeze out some more profit from the little worker bees so that they can continue consolidating wealth against us and have more of a buffer between them and the consequences of the climate crisis and all that. That's genuinely why I think things have gone so far off the rails since Reagan. Is they kind of realized the system was in a way doomed to collapse at some point, so they've just been trying to get as much money as possible to to really insulate themselves from consequences moving forward. And that's why you see them building the bunkers and having all that. Um, which again is kind of funnily arrogant that they think they can just go hide out when the climate changes to the degree it is projected to, and probably will, unfortunately, because we are ruled by spineless bastards. Anyway, if you'd like some more information about that, I just put out a hour-long video talking about it. So yeah. Um, Anywho, let's talk about the retirement age, right? So here's the same post basically, but I just wanted to read this guy's analysis. He's just honestly I'd call him like a citizens journalist kind of page. He just posts things that he is reading and checking out. It's pretty cool. Um yeah, here's his analysis. Right wingers and conservatives want you to work yourself into the grave because they think you shouldn't have any purpose outside of work. Right. Which yeah, that's a philosophy that people have internalized. Even my own folks, kind of carry themselves that way. Um, and yeah, he's raging at the idea of people not being used up to the point of death by their employers. Which again, you study class dynamics, they're perfectly fine with that happening. You know, in fact, the reason we have a weekend or the reason we have labor protections at all, during the Gilded Age, we didn't. People had to fight and die to get those things, right? And now here these jokers are trying to, go back on the victories that, American people, right? And again, you talk about conservatives, they always like to LARP as being patriots, but here they are spitting on the heritage, I guess, of the American worker, right? Like how anti-American can you get? It's kind of crazy. These people are more aligned with the those at the reins during the Gilded Age than they are the average American. And unfortunately, the fact is, Ben Shapiro, all those type of talking heads that are funded by the Heritage Foundation and other think tanks, um, like the Foundation for Economic Education, all that. Um, they're funded by like big oil people and stuff. They're funded by individuals that benefit from the status quo being the way it is and running people into the ground like this. or the way that it was, with the Gilded Age. That's why we see people, there's child labor on the rise. There's deaths. Children are dying at work in our country in this day and age. We have to analyze like where we are, losing the script, right? We're literally producing outcomes now that are worse than in the past. It doesn't make sense, right? Why are we going on this trajectory? Who's it actually benefiting, right? The fact that Ben Shapiro is talking about it, makes it pretty clear. It's almost like they're telling on themselves. The rich are telling you this. It's like, well, now we got to consider why exactly would the rich want this, Anyway, let's keep looking at stuff. So with that in mind, that they're trying to do that, one significant thing is we'll look here real quick. Chinese begin to collect their pension once they retire at age 60 for men, 55 for white collar women, and 50 for women who work in factories. So if they're able to do that and and that's from Routers, and if they're able to do that and have a functional society, right? Um, why exactly? What exactly are we doing here? Right? And so with that in mind, let's look at this. Here we have Strike for All posting, our world is rapidly changing. AI and automation are increasingly present and continue to grow. We believe AI and automation should make our lives better, not worse. Technology should work for the working class, not against us. That's why we support a 4-day, 32-hour work week without a loss in pay. And I had to chime in over here talking about an article we'll go into later about how ridiculous a 40-hour work week truly is. And then also, when we factor in the climate crisis, working less less production in general is a necessary component to address the climate, right? And again, if you don't believe that's a significant thing to do, go watch that other video, please. I'm begging you. um, so yeah. Uh Again, when it comes to talking about the establishment and the status quo and their position in regard to solving climate change or addressing the climate crisis, rather, I shouldn't say solving climate change. It stands in stark contrast to what we actually need, right? And then, we study our history here. The US Senate actually passed legislation that would make a 30-hour work week the standard all the way back in 1933. The 40-hour work week was standardized in 1940, I believe, and it has remained there for 84 years. So you're telling me all the advances in automation, right, over the last couple of decades, and we're still stuck at a standard that was set 84 years ago, when just a few years prior we were actually talking about 10 hours less, right? So we have to consider over time the lives of our families, our friends, our neighbors, all of our communities have been squandered by the ruling class in their pursuit of profit, even though they were already making more profit due to automation. They decided to double down. Again, it is an act of class warfare. It's overt, but it's like just there on the surface. Like you really got to look and see. They've been, the executive decision making, the people who have had executive decision making control in this country have always been those with consolidated wealth, right? And that's why they chose to make us have to work 40-hour weeks to get by, even though there's figures circulating to the tune of, this is my favorite article. I feel like I'm bringing this up on every video. But that the top 1% have taken $50 trillion from the bottom 90% since just 1975. right? And again, this analysis ends in 2018. So imagine since COVID and these last 4 years, right, of just the rampant consolidation they've been engaging in, you know. Um, and here's the OG thing. It was the Black 30-hour week bill. It was championed by Senator Hugo Black from Alabama in 1932 to establish a 30-hour maximum work week. During the 20s, some economists argued that the shorter work week would improve the quality of life for working people and offset labor displacement working from technological change. The dramatic claims, or yeah, they write them off as dramatic, but yeah, the claims of the technocracy movement, which emerged, goodness, I can't speak, apologies. The technoc, the technocracy, okay, this movement, which emerged in 1932, reinforced concerns that technology contributed to unemployment. Right? Very pertinent, considering the AI and all the automation. Um, Also, just some comparison since we were entertaining things like that, right? Can you imagine our senators actually trying to help folks out in that capacity now? Even though now it's harder to buy a house today than it was during the Depression. Median annual pay was about 22% of the cost of a home during the Depression. In 2019, it's only 14% of the cost of the home, right? There are other factors to consider here, but there is no version of that which is sustainable, right? Again, if you study the past too, check out this book titled In Defense of Housing. This one's just a little summary, but they go into detail about how housing has not always been treated as a commodity, and the privatization of the commons was necessary to begin commodifying housing. So, in regard to all of human history, this specifically is a very recent development and one that we perhaps should really be scrutinizing because of the consequences to our fellow man and our communities, right? The only people winning from this arrangement are those with consolidated wealth. Imagine that. You know, our communities are losing. Again, it is class warfare. Our friends, our families, and neighbors are all subject to conditions that, you know, anytime really. It's like almost like gambling living here, where we might, have an emergency come up, and then there we go. There goes our housing in the richest country in the history of the world, in the so-called freest nation, right? Or that's like what they like to circle jerk about. I don't think it's particularly free compared to others, and there's empirical evidence uh, going into detail about that. Anyway, going back to the 32-hour work week, we might want to look to our contemporaries to see, who else is doing this and how did they accomplish it. Here we go. In Germany, piloting 4-day workweek programs. Earlier this year, groups of doctors and metal workers also went on strike last year, both over wages and working hours. And then it says the Metal Workers Union demanded a 32-hour work week, which it secured in a deal last month. Again, shows right there strong organized communities and unions are what will win us concessions from our ruling class. Society can continue if we work 32-hour work weeks. In fact, in order for it to continue, we have to work less. That's what we need. So unions are how we get there. Organized communities are how we get there. Building dual power in our communities, like what the Black Socialists in America advocate for. Utilizing tools like the general strike, right? That's how we get there. We have to do this if we are going to address the climate crisis, right? Or, say, if not the climate crisis, why not have a better future for our friends, families, and neighbors? Or, if not that, why not ending war? ending unnecessary suffering for our fellow man who's just like us, just a regular working person who is also concerned with their friends, families, and neighbors and environment, right? We are much more like the people that our bombs are killing than the people who are choosing to produce the bombs, use our taxes to deploy the bombs, you know? It's a we're really at a moment where we can look at this for what it is, this institution or all the various institutions that make a quilt, and that quilt being the status quo or the Western hegemony, which is really just an ownership class that's hell bent on maintaining itself. Again, you get through these layers of analysis, and we can say, is this justifiable to continue, right? When we have these climate things going on, right? We have to say, put our foot down at some point and say, like, this is wrong. We cannot allow billions of lives to be forfeit just because a handful of people want to be obscenely wealthy, right? It's absurdly wrong. So again, now that we're aware of this and the real extent of the consequences, yeah, we can then decide for ourselves as communities if we want to pivot away. And that's what dual power allows us to do. That's what organized labor and unions allow us to do. So there's my little union soapbox. Sorry. Um, and yeah, just to keep going on about that, Maynard, John Keynes over here, um, yeah, let's just talking about organized labor. Let's read our history. Our history. Again, history that really is not honored by conservatives, even though this is by working people, the regular working people. That's our class. That's who we are, right? But we don't really honor it. We don't even honor Labor Day in the same way that most of the world honors it. In fact, I think we've changed our Labor Day. May 5th is usually what the original Labor Day was, and they changed it, I think, to explicitly to mess with our class, and not build international solidarity, because that's another thing. International solidarity is huge, right? It's definitely going to be necessary for addressing the climate. But they don't want us to have that because that scares them. That means an end to their way of life. That means an end to the Western hegemonic status quo around the globe and their systems of resource extraction and perpetuating their own class. So they can't have that. Anyway, let's get back on topic. The 5-day work week is a cultural norm which is the result of early 1900s union advocacy to reduce the 6-day work week, which led to the invention of the weekend, like I was just saying. In the early 20th century, when the average work week in developed nations was reduced from around 60 to 40 hours, it was expected that further decreases would occur over time. It would make sense, right? We're increasing automation, we should work less. In 1930, economist Maynard John John Keynes, sorry, I'm laughing again, but it's because it's absurd to me. 1930, almost 100 years ago now, um, estimated that technological change and productivity improvements would make a 15-hour work week possible within a couple of generations. Other notable people throughout history to predict continuing reductions in working hours includes the founding father Benjamin Franklin, Karl Marx, John Stuart Mill, George Shaw. 1956, Richard Nixon promised Americans they would only have to work 4 days in the not too distant future. And then, yeah, we know what happened after that. Talk about, they effectively said psych, and they did not allow unions to prosper, right? There we go. Where is that darn graph? Here's just a graph of just union membership in the U.S. since 1960, from 1960 to 2020. Not great. Not very good. We see the curve here, nice sharp drop, then a little bit of, a little bit of a different curve, and 70 hits, and yep, it's a landslide. Here is a graph of union membership and income inequality. We will notice back here, um, we get the strong policy for unions in the 30s to avert the crisis of the Great Depression, which is really just the implosion of the status quo, the capitalist status quo in the first place. But yeah, income inequality, extremely, extremely high. Again, very curious to compare with our current day and age. The Wall Street crash occurs, Great Depression's going on, they're strengthening unions, and then it goes, we've almost um, it's inverted once again after Reagan, right? After neoliberalism, which, has impacted us not only here in the US, but on a global scale, has impacted like how labor and just there's so many cascading problems from neoliberalism. Let's just say that. So it's important to identify where it began and why and who wanted it and all that. So that's why I point that out. Um, but yeah, cut and dry, unions are good for helping us out. Also, talking about the Keynes assessment, right? That we are going to all right. Here we are, 2019, rallying against union busting. Anywho, but yeah, the reason I bring the Keynes stuff up, or this next resource up, is in regard to the Keynes analysis of possibly 15-hour weeks. It's like, how accurate was that? Well, let's analyze. Here on Aeon, this is another one of my favorite articles, along with that 50 trillion one. We have the tools and technology to work less and live better. Right? Here they begin talking about that, how Keynes was speculating about in 100 years' time, society would have advanced so far that we would barely need to work. The main problem confronting countries such as Britain and the US would be boredom, and people might need to ration out work in 3-hour shifts or a 15-hour week to put off the problem. Right? At first glance, it seems he's done a woeful job predicting the futures. In 1930, the average worker in the US, UK, and Australia and Japan spent 45 to 48 hours at work. Today, that is still up around 38 hours. Right? If we wanted to produce as much as Keynes' countrymen did in the 30s, we wouldn't need everyone to work even 15 hours per week. Which again, when you bring up the climate again, it always goes back to the climate. um, Degrowth and working less is quite literally necessary for addressing the climate crisis and saving lives and mitigating more death, because there's already been that, right? We are already in a changed climate that has already cost thousands and thousands of lives. Um, Sorry, I was just thinking a bit. uh, but yeah, they say we wouldn't even need to work 15 hours a week. So if we just scale back production, which we need to do anyway to address the climate crisis, we would be working less. I believe I read that we need to scale back production to around the amount we had in 1960, which if you reflect, I'm sorry I don't have a resource for this. I swear I've read this before, but I just couldn't find it again. I read that we need to scale back production to 1960 to be addressing the climate crisis. And if we reflect 1960, was considered like one of the golden ages of capitalism, right? The 50s and 60s. So it's like all we need to do is produce as much as we were producing back then, which is possible, right? We got to think about how much crap we produce and how much crap is unnecessary, right? All marketing really is unnecessary. In the Soviet Union, when they talk about when they introduced marketing, people made fun of things that had to be advertised because they thought that meant that it was a crappy product because they had to spend money to convince people to buy it, right? Which is factual, right? It's like we don't need half of the crap we're producing. We don't need all these, all this plastic, single-use plastic. We don't need all these things shipped around the globe. We don't need our food system to be so weird where we're shipping stuff to and fro to package and then ship off the sale and using single-use plastics to do all of that. Everything is so deeply backwards in regards to our synergy with the planet. And again, it all stems from who has, or really what class has executive decision making capability. It all goes back to that. Um, anyway, let's continue reading. If you adjust for increases in labor productivity, it could be done in 7 or 8 hours. 10 in Japan. These increases in productivity come from a century of automation and technological advances, allowing us to produce more stuff with less labor. In this sense, modern developed countries have way overshot Keynes' prediction. We need to work only half the hours he predicted to match his lifestyle, right? But instead, because those at the reins have had exclusive access to decision making control in regard to who pockets the fruits of automation, right? It turns out that instead of us working less and getting paid the same, our ruling class decided no, I'm going to put all the surplus in my pocket and they can keep working the same rate. That way, not only am I exploiting them further, right? So that's there's a material reward for them doing this. There's a material incentive. But also, it comes with the handy side effect of people being too busy to continue organizing, right? We have to remember the last big organizing we did was in the Great Depression. The ruling class was terrified during the Great Depression. They were worried about it all falling down. One prominent fellow said he would be willing to part with half of his wealth if it meant continuing the status quo and that he would get to keep the other half, right? So they were terrified when that happened. The fact that we didn't collapse there was, a stroke of luck for them. So they spent the rest of the country's history has been the ruling class being hell bent on not letting us organize to that capacity again, right? We saw the union leadership stuff because Keynes ideas were shown to not really be working out so great in the 70s. We had a choice to either pivot away and do something new, which would be socialism, or the ownership class chose to double down on maintaining their status quo and maintaining their position at the reins, which is neoliberalism, which is really just fascism, you know, especially as it continues to decay, right? It's almost unavoidable fascism's rise um, over the last couple of decades, but especially since Trump. And again, that's continued with Biden, right? We have kids in cages still. We have the National Guard deployed in our subway systems, We have police budgets increasing even though we had the largest protests in our history against the police, right? We have huge budgets for the police, even though for the in the metro in New York, even though it was the cost of the police far outweighs any sort of crime in the metro. with regard to like avoiding fares and whatnot. you know, our ownership class shows us who they are with the decisions they make, right? There's a lot of mythology, there's a lot of decorum, there's a lot of platitudes. But when you sift through all that and really look at what they do as a class and what they're incentivized to continue doing and why they have those incentives and where they come from, again, it's class warfare, plain and simple. We should be, as this article is titled, we should be working less and living better. We need this to address the climate crisis, and we also get the side effect of having more time for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, to be in our environment, to steward our environment. All these things are so necessary. We just don't have time to do them because we're focused on grinding um, in a system where we are increasingly shouldered with the burdens of its inadequacy, right? Again, we don't need to look too far. Paycheck to paycheck. Let's just Google that and see um, how many. 2023 survey conducted by payroll.org highlighted that 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, a 6% increase from the previous year. In other words, more than, yeah. So, yeah, that used to only be 60%, I believe in 2022. You know, it's very obvious that more and more people are going to be falling through the cracks. So we're working more than we need to be working because of our greedy ownership class needing to stuff their pockets with the fruits of automations instead of helping us out, right? So we're still working 40 hours a week, and yet that many of us are paycheck to paycheck and increasing. That's not even considering people that have fallen through the cracks, that are homeless or that turn to, suicide or other things that, are symptoms of suffering that we are subject to by our ruling class. They are choosing this with their policy. They're failing us. So that's what I wanted to really talk about here because, now that Bernie has brought this up and put it in discussion, and also that, the conservative status quo is talking about increasing the retirement age, again, it comes to a point where we need to identify, is this something we should pivot away from, and how can we do it if that's the case, which we'll get into that later. But yeah, here's the graph of weekly hours of work required per worker to match the output of a British worker in 1930. Again, years, decades into industrialization, right? So, yeah. And again, look at how quickly Japan created this capacity. Like, it's a real shame. I read a Jason Hickel quote the other day, and I wish I had that pulled up, but I don't know if I'll be able to find it in a timely manner. So I'll just try to recite it from memory. But he was basically saying that we live in the shadow of the society we could live in if we actually had democracy in our workplaces, right? Because if Japan was able to go this quickly, right, and develop that quickly with regard to automation, think about if there was no ownership class to be making these decisions for us, to funnel wealth away from us and our communities and our environment. Think if all of that profit was going to the workers themselves and the communities themselves, or being invested in climate solutions or solutions that actually helped people, right, by the state. You know, we like, of course, progress throughout history has been good, right? But it could have been so much better over these last couple of decades with democracy. In fact, I'm actually really salty I didn't find that tweet for for this video. It's extremely significant. Maybe I'll honestly all of Jason Hickel's work is very good. Let's just pull his Twitter up and just see what he's got going on. Um, yeah, doesn't miss. If a large majority of your population wants to stop genocidal war crimes, and yet your government officials double down on doing the opposite, you don't live in a democracy. A great point is, there protests for Palestine I recently attended. Um, they were one of the chants we were chanting through our capital city was that we were demanding food and water for Gaza. Very basic request, right? And the very next day, I saw a journalist sharing that someone inside of the administration was leaking that the administration says food and water is not something they are going to even prioritize. You know, it's just insane, right? And then we scale that insanity to the climate or to how they helped us, and that's in air quotes, mitigate the deaths and suffering from COVID, right? It's nothing short of a betrayal. And then again, this, of course, the same establishment betrays us here, allowing the rich to siphon off the wealth and put it in their pockets instead of helping us live better lives. That's to me, that's an egregious affront, right? You're telling me that I have to sacrifice my time unnecessarily, spend it away from my family and my friends and my community and taking away time we could be using to better our world and better our community and better our environment. And that time is instead being sacrificed for the express purpose of making rich people more rich so that they can then use that richness to safeguard their position in society by shaping policy and putting it toward things that are, the things that they weren't elected to do, right? Think tanks. No one elected the billionaires that donate to think tanks. No one is electing the billionaires that uphold Israel, right? So it's really significant in the ways this overlaps. And again, it's a great time to talk about it now that this is back in the in discussion, Um yeah. And again, this is especially makes this especially egregious that they want us to not retire. They want us to be working to the grave, even though 70% of us can't afford a minor emergency. They're paycheck to paycheck. Like this is nothing short of insanity, right? They're off the rails. Neoliberalism itself has been off the rails, but this is the culmination of decades of doubling down on neoliberalism, right? And it's not going to get better. They're going to continue running us into the ground. The next pandemic, the climate crisis, all of this getting squeezed, right? Homelessness be increasing, the our ecology getting sacrificed, right? In just a couple of years, I've watched the ecology in my around me be sacrificed by greedy developers, right? Again, nothing short of insanity, this status quo. Anyway, let's keep going. So yeah, this is just an article here. It's a paid article, but I'm using archive.is, so definitely do that to get around stuff like that. But yeah, if we want to stop climate change and save the earth, we need to work less. We're overworked. It's overeating the planet. We need to change our relationship with work and slow down if we want to survive. Right? And again, this is supported by science. It's not just like a platitude. This is like reality. And yet, our establishment is choosing to do quite the opposite. In fact, once again, I'll implore you to go watch the previous video regarding the climate and how deeply our status quo betrays us in that regard. Um, yeah, and this is just a great article. Uh, it's it's honestly kind of long, so in the interest of not boring y'all to death, I will read it. Actually, no, you can listen to it right there. But I think I'll go into it and annotate it maybe later on, just this itself. But the point still stands. Definitely seek it out. It's just on Medium, so you can find it easy. Um, Here's another one from the BBC, 2019. This one I think was from this year, from last year. I mean, maybe I don't know. It just says June 26th. What date? But I'm pretty sure this one is a recent one. Maybe let's find out actually. 2022. There we go. So, yeah. Right now, the human race faces two major challenges: overwork and climate change, right? Is the solution to degrow the economy? And again, that's where Jason Hickel comes back in. Incredible work in regard to degrowth and a really practical kind of analysis and ideas. So really cool stuff. Definitely check that out. Um, yeah, here we go. If everyone in the world consumed the same levels of fuel, food, clothes, and building materials as Europeans, we would require 2.8 planet Earths. If everyone led a US lifestyle, it would require 5 planet Earths. Again, that's off the rails nonsense, right? And again, all we have to do is scale back production to what it was during the golden age of capitalism. Right now, we're in the off the rails age. We need to just scale back, which sounds bad, right? We're asking people to scale back their lifestyles. But again, we have to think then how much of our lifestyle is a contrivance? How much of our lifestyle has to be the way it is? How much do we really enjoy? Because again, when you study, I hope I can find this. Yeah, yeah, here we go. Isolated indigenous people as happy as wealthy Western peers, right? It's challenging the perception that money buys happiness. And again, when you study what it is to be a human and don't entertain only the context that the Western status quo spoon feeds you, which again is really just rooted in white supremacy and rooted in, what is good for capital, not what's good for humans, it becomes very clear. But anyway, yeah, somewhere in between commuting, making money, spending money, we are undeniably living unsustainably, right? And just last month, the 29th of July, became the earliest Earth overshoot day on record, the day in which humanity's demand for ecological resources exceeds what the Earth can regenerate in a year, according to an international research organization, Global Footprint Network. 1972 was the last time we made it into December, right? If we spent 10% less time working, our carbon footprint would be reduced by 14.6, right? And again, with regard to that, implying individual people's carbon footprint is even really significant isn't that much. But again, it will assist in helping us address the larger problem, which is where is it? Where is it? Recalibration of limits to growth. Let's look at that again. Wait, is this what it was? No, darn. What was it? Gosh darn it. Let me open those back up. I think it's one of these that I have open. Yep. Carbon inequality. That's what I was looking for. Yeah. The richest 1%. Again, that's something that we're going to need policy to address, right? There's no other way around it. We need we need desperately policy to address this stuff. A good way to get policy is working less, using the time we're spending not working to organize and to put in to practice ways we can actually hold our ruling class accountable. So in a way, even though, this is saying, oh yeah, we'll have a smaller carbon footprint because we're commuting less, sure, but we have more time to hold our rulers accountable and organize against them in the way that they are demonstrably organized against us. They like, again, there's no mistake. They are against us. Their status quo requires our death at worst and squandering our lives at best. Right? So why keep them around if that's the status quo that we're required? We're going to have to use policy to get them out of their decision-making roles, right? They have relegated executive decision-making capability amongst themselves almost exclusively. Almost exclusively, those making laws or making executive decisions in the economy are those with consolidated wealth, or either they're beholden to people who have consolidated wealth, right? So again, policy, we got to do that. But yeah, yeah, isn't that funny? We like to blame climate change on industry and big business, but the way we live, work, and consume is actually the primary source of emission. And yeah, consumers, yeah, are culpable. They're responsible in some capacity, but again, we're only doing what is available to us to do, right? We're not actually making these executive decisions that result in us doing this, right? The rich are. The rich are also doing all that. So anyway, let's carry on. This video I wanted to mention.
One easy appointment. We can replace your windshield.
Oh geez, a 15-minute unskippable, and you can't mute it either.
Stay safe.
Or can you? That's over there. Things hiding from me. Anyway. Oh, I actually can't mute this one. You will listen to the Planet Fitness ad. All right. No, but yeah, this video I just wanted to share. I'm not sure if this is the one that I'm thinking of or not because it's like 49 minutes, so I didn't watch it all again. I probably should at some point. But but he was talking about the dynamics of how collapses of civilizations actually work, which again, we should equip ourselves with, right? That's important context to understand the world we live in is how have societies in the past collapsed, right? There's nothing special about ours that declares that it's going to be some timeless thing, that it's never going to collapse or never have problems. So when those problems arise, we should be best equipped to deal with them, right? To understand them. And he said, I believe in this video, it might have been a different video, I don't know. But he was talking about how one successful way that a collapsing society turned around, I believe it was like Byzantium that he was talking about, is they actually employed degrowth. Way back in the day, they scaled back their society and successfully kept it together. So I feel like that's cut and dry evidence of that what our path should be as we move forward. We can look at reality and say, okay, our rulers are going to do, they're going to do, where is it? They're going to do this. They're going to keep doing war. They're not going to help our communities. They've shown us they don't care about helping our communities after COVID. They've shown us they don't care about helping our communities have basic nutrition or helping us with, with education. Um, all sorts of facets of our lives and transportation. Everyone, GMC said everyone needs to get a car, so everyone has a car. And again, how dare they imply here that it's like, consumers' fault, right? It's like the rich are shaping the status quo. So anyway, um, yeah, really cool article. I would recommend checking this whole thing out too. Talking about degrowth, everything. Um, and then here's just some more things I wanted to talk about that I saw that I just want to add on. Uh, we got Albert Einstein, right? Which I touched on him in a previous video. That his socialist politics were pretty significant. Um, so I guess let's just read it. So he was born in 1879, most famous for science. He was also a socialist, and in 1949 wrote a critique of the capitalist system and its inherent flaws, published in Monthly Review. In it, he argues production is carried on for profit, not for use. There is no provision that all those able and willing to work will always be in a position to find employment. An army of unemployed almost always exists. The worker is constantly in fear of losing his job. Since unemployed and poorly paid workers do not provide a profitable market, the production of consumers' goods is restricted, and great hardship is the consequence. Technological progress frequently results in more unemployment rather than an easing of the burden of work for all. Again, just exacerbated by neoliberalism. It's disgusting the degree of class warfare that our rulers have been engaging in. Anyway, let's continue. The profit motive, in conjunction with competition among capitalists, is responsible for an instability in the accumulation and utilization of capital, which leads to increasingly severe depressions, right? All the way back then, he was able to analyze this. And that's just, the system itself, right? It's contending with its own self. It's not even factoring in the climate crisis in that analysis, right? Unlimited competition leads to a huge waste of labor and to that crippling of the social consciousness of individuals, which I mentioned before. I am convinced there is only one way to eliminate these grave evils, namely through the establishment of a socialist economy accompanied by an education system which would be oriented towards social goals. After the creation of Israel in 1948, Einstein was asked to be its president. He refused, as he believed that a Jewish state and army went against the essential nature of Judaism. He also condemned the massacre of Palestinian Arabs in the Nakba, for example. Um, there, at Deir Yassin, I'm not quite sure on the pronunciation, and accused the Herut party, which later became part of the governing Likud party, which is Netanyahu's party, as being a political party closely akin in its organization methods and political philosophy and social appeal to the Nazi and fascist parties, which would explain why our current administration and all neoliberal governments really are such enthusiasts of Israel, right? um, And then I did want to talk about this here too. This guy says, leave Einstein alone, or at least distinguish between then and now. Socialism in the West today is as oppressive as capitalism. It selects who to support and who not to, with no equality for all. Move on. So there's layers to this. His little thing here at the end is just so funny when you consider, that a zip code is the most determining factor in our current society of who's going to be prosperous. So that's just crazy. that this would be what causes him to condemn socialism when that's literally our current system to a T. Also, when we consider the fun topic of necropolitics, this theory of the use of social and political power to dictate how some people may live and some must die, that's definitely a big part of neoliberalism and our current status quo with regard to the climate, with regard to our labor and general well-being in the West and in here in the US especially. It definitely does select who to support and who not to support with no equality, right? That's crazy. Like, again, crazy. Nobody can control the zip code they're born in, yet that's the biggest determinant of success. That's insane. That. Anyway, so yeah, let's distinguish then between the socialism of his day and the socialism now, right? Socialism of his day is how we got the New Deal, which is something, again, it's using policy to effectively not let the ruling class completely obliterate regular working people, which really can't happen because regular working people were getting angry and organized and rule of law was threatened because of that. And that's why they gave us the New Deal, right? So again, why not organize in that fashion now when 78% of us are paycheck to paycheck and we have a looming climate crisis? Why the heck not organize that same way and win concessions from our government that same way? Right? I think I replied to him, so I just wanted to read that. Oh, yeah. Socialist organizing of his time is how we got the New Deal. Don't you think regular working class folks need to organize to that scale again when we're faced with economic and climate challenges our ruling class seems perfectly all right with ignoring? Also, yeah, socialism in the West, LMFAO, where that shit at? He's spitting. But yeah, I mean, really, it's cut and dry at this point. At this point. It's crazy that I look at the year we're in and that the problems we're still having. Also, if I'm not mistaken, that's Mr. Paul Robeson right there. Did he ever meet? Um, yeah, cool. Yeah, he's posted up. He had a 20-year friendship with civil rights leader and actor Paul Robeson, who has some also awesome things to share just about the USSR, about his analysis on the US. Yeah, here's Einstein, ardent defender of black Americans against racism, which again, you study MLK's work. It's right there, integrated perfectly. Racial justice is economic justice, is climate justice. It's all the same thing, right? When black people are disproportionately impacted by racist policy, um, you know, that can manifest with regard to the climate also. It definitely manifests economically. Again, all these issues are so interlocked, and that's why I really want to feel, that's why I really feel so motivated to talk about them, because we're at a pivotal moment. We really are. And we need to capitalize on this and not continue letting our ruling class double down on our sacrifice effectively for their pockets. But yeah, that's pretty cool. Paul Robeson, though, as I was saying, really cool stuff he has to share about the USSR and about analysis here in the US, and all that. And, with regard to the Red Scare, they had him, he was a victim. If we can pull that up, I guess real quickly. Testify, probably. Yeah, he had to go before the Tinney Committee. He was leading anti-communist investigations. Yeah, free speech, woohoo, awesome freedom. Yeah, Again, it was always a dictatorship of capital. That's all it's ever been, and all it can be. So again, another great way to pivot away when you know this shows us what all it can be, right? Anyway, yeah, here's another Bernie thing calling for that, and just another one. This one I wanted to include the details because very significant. Sean Fain, UAW, the United Auto, or yeah, the UAW's the auto worker union, was testifying at the Senate hearing. Those who profit off the labor of others have all the time in the world, while those who make this country run, the people who build the products and contribute to labor, have less and less time for themselves, for their families, and for their lives. Cut and dry. This is why we need to pivot away and do what Sean Fain advocates. What might that be? Mass strikes, May 2028. What's going on in May? May Day. Um, International Workers' Day. May 1st. All the way back in 1856, undertook a mass stoppage as part of the 8-hour workday movement. Right? Again, inspiring American workers to have their first stoppage. That was in Australia, actually. See, and again, that's why they're worried about international solidarity, like I was saying earlier. They're terrified of an international organized working class, especially because of this, right? Literally, study our history as regular working people. They don't teach us this stuff. They teach us mythology and decorum and a glamorous narrative of progress when really the ruling class has been at odds with our progress as a working people. In fact, check out this video. I won't play it here, but titled "This Poverty Graph is Lying to You" by Hakim. He goes into all the different ways that like substantiating effectively what I just claimed, and then also cites his sources, which are So I'm citing him, citing all his stuff. It's there's a lot of information out there. I'm just saying that. Anyway, though, yeah. So he's calling for May 2028 general striking. Um, and yeah, that's hugely significant. That we, again, capitalize on this momentum that the UAW was able to start and, again, advocate for ourselves as working people and for our communities and for our environment and for all the lives that are at stake in regard to the climate. And not even just the climate, but that are squandered by this arrangement where 78% of us are paycheck to paycheck and, unable to access an adequate life. Again, our lives are squandered. So, what better time to pivot away when our lives are being squandered and our environment is going to be unlivable for so many? Um, like I can think of no better time than now, frankly. Um, so all that to say, please do check out the Black Socialists in America. Um, they have this really neat website where they have a lot of resources that we can go into. A lot of stuff. And then there are contemporary examples like Cooperation Jackson, Solidarity Economy efforts like in St. Louis and Vermont. All sorts of stuff to check out and emulate in our communities as we move forward. So yeah, that's all for now. Thanks for checking this out. I appreciate you, and best wishes to all as we move forward. Thanks again.